I've been kind of reflecting on the past few years, and I'm sure we'd all agree that lockdown was not a great time. It was awful. But one of the positive things about lockdown was the lack of traffic jams. For whenever I meet a traffic jam, I'm sure you do the same, find or look for an alternative route. And when it's trying to get out of St Meadows, it's normally over the top of Cruel Hill. But the problem with that is that every time I do it, everyone else appears to have the same idea. So invariably you just meet another traffic jam. And these things can make us frustrated and angry, especially if, in my case, I have to turn around and face the fact that I'm not going to get to my desired destination in time, if at all. Now this is just a really small example of things that block us moving forward in our life. For we all, at some point or another, face roadblocks of all kinds that put a stop to our plans and our hopes. Even our gifts, talents and abilities can face roadblocks, which may result in those God-given talents never being used. They become dreams of the past. As I say, we all wrestle with these roadblocks. But the question is, how do we avoid living a frustrated life? How do we keep ourselves from being cynical? Or from having that que sera, sera attitude? Or even from pushing ahead with plans regardless of others, regardless of God, and regardless of anyone that gets in our way? Well, Paul, this morning in this reading from Philippians, is dealing with a massive roadblock to his plans. Paul was a passionate, committed missionary, a gifted preacher, full of energy and enthusiasm. He travelled around Europe preaching the message of Jesus and had further plans to reach Spain with the good news of Jesus' saving love. Then stop. Plans thwarted, and we read that he finds himself in a place of isolation in a Roman prison. How does he deal with this? How does he deal with this roadblock, this isolation? Well, rather than mope or feel sorry for himself or even get angry at the situation he is in, he saw opportunity. He saw opportunity in hardship, opportunity in disappointment. He saw the donut, not the hole. And if you want to know what that's all about, ask about the Children's Address. He saw that despite his situation, his circumstances, God was working out his unstoppable plans. And he used this hard place as an opportunity to talk to people inside the roadblock. Paul's attitude was to think big, think beyond the present, think beyond his circumstances, and to use this time to witness to the glory of God, to share the good news. When our plans are frustrated, like Paul, we need to think of the bigger plan. What is God going to do in this roadblock? What is God going to do at this hard time, in this hard place that we face? Friends, life is not an arbitrary stroke of fate. Life is not the workings of an impersonal God, nor of a God who is so weak that he doesn't see what's before us. God is a planner, God is a worker, and he will work out his plans in his way, the best way. He is our Father, and he fits us into his plan, not the other way around. I wonder if we really believe that God is in control. You see, as a Christian, Paul had a high view of the providence of God. And that's the belief that God is in charge of everything that happens to us, the good and the bad, the positive, the negative, and that in some way unknown to us, he orders all things, including our own free choices, so that what happens to us is for our good and indeed for his glory. This idea is easier to believe when things are going well, when our health is good, our family is together, our marriage is positive, our career is moving forward, and we have money to pay the bills, a good church to attend, friends who love us, and everything's smelling of roses. There's something else to say that you believe in God's providence when you have failing health, when your marriage is falling apart, when your family is blown apart, when your career is going nowhere, and your friends have turned against you. That's when you discover what you truly believe. How on earth could Paul look at his circumstances in such a positive light? After all, being chained to a soldier in a Roman jail is not the normally seen as a good career move. Well, here's the answer. Paul judged everything by kingdom priorities, by God's plan, by God's providence. And we need to be asking God that we may join his plans because they are unstoppable. And when we do this, we won't be frustrated. And remember, as the old hymn says, God works in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. Often we do not understand the working of God. God can and often uses strange events to bring about his plans. God has a weird toolkit from our perspective that he uses because he thinks in different ways from us. And for Paul, God used the chains of imprisonment and the people who criticised him. Paul was in incredibly hard circumstances, but God would use these challenging times to bring about transformation to the Roman guard, transformation to that city. In verses 12 to 14, Paul gives us help in understanding how to change our attitude towards difficult times, hard places. He writes, "Now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel." Isn't that wonderful? As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. Have a look at Acts 21 for the background to the phrase, "what has happened to me." For as he looks back, Paul sees clearly that everything leading up to this point has happened for a divinely ordained purpose. And I mean everything. The false rumours, the riot, the beating, the arrest, the 4 years in confinement, the public misunderstanding, the ruining of his reputation, the slander, the whispers, the accusations, the shipwreck, the snakebite, his house arrest in Rome. But he found new opportunities in all of this to use for the advancement of God's kingdom. He used these opportunities, these hard times, to work for God's plan of bringing men and women into that relationship with Jesus. And Paul uses specific words when he talks about his difficult circumstances. The word advanced is a military term that refers to the movement of an army into enemy territory. As the soldiers move forward, they clear the obstacles, open the roads, drain the swamps, build pontoon bridges so that the whole army can advance unhindered. Paul means to say that his imprisonment, which seemed to be a setback, actually served to advance the gospel. It actually served to move things forward and not to hold things back. He is a prisoner. He is isolated in a Roman jail, but this advancement moved the gospel forward. And we see this in verse 13. As a result, he writes, "It has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ." He couldn't preach to the masses anymore. I mean, how can you do that when you're in a cell? But he could, and he did, live out his faith and proclaim God's love to those who were his captives, to the palace guard. He was preaching to Caesar's personal bodyguard, the elite. And it's significant to note that he wasn't chained to the same guard all the time. The guards would change every 6 hours. In Paul's mind, he is not chained to them, they're chained to him. He had not been imprisoned. How could he ever have reached the household of Caesar? It would have been impossible. In the 2 years of this confinement, it has been estimated that the gospel could have possibly reached the entire company of 2,000 palace guards. What an opportunity. What an opportunity that he grasped. How many lives were changed by that? It reached places that it would never have reached were it not for this imprisonment, had it not been for these harsh circumstances. And moreover, the Christians are empowered by this. Did you see that in verse 14? Because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. You know, the Christians are going out preaching the gospel courageously They have backbone because of Paul's difficulties, Paul's witness. He is so God mission centered in his life. He doesn't even talk about the lessons that he's learned on a personal level from this experience. You see, it's not about him. It's not about Paul. It's about the advancement of the gospel. It's about getting the good news out there. And that's something far bigger that he's living for. He must have felt intense frustration and discomfort, but because he was looking beyond himself to the furtherance of the good news, he didn't have self-pity. Not a bit of it. A psychologist wrote, "We have narrowed our scope of vision to the small picture. Our lives, our homes, our careers, our bodies, our hobbies. We are therefore intense, tense, mistrustful, and perpetually ill at ease." Of course we are. Because when circumstances go against what I want and cherish in myself, disaster comes. You see, having a bigger vision brings freedom. When we are involved in God's mission, we are about something bigger. And we realise that God can use all circumstances for his glory, whatever they may be. Whether that be hardship, whether that be a difficult place that we find ourselves in. Friends, what we surely learn from Paul is this: difficult times can lead to opportunities. Opportunities to help, to support, and to ultimately share the good news. I just think about the things that we were able to do in the centre during these difficult years. Opportunities to demonstrate the love of God through serving our community and beyond. The hard times were used as a springboard to share something of the love of Jesus. Friends, we must stop staining at doors that God may have shut and start walking through the doors that God has opened. That's the power of gospel thinking. And we need to realise that nothing is too difficult for him. Nothing. And that includes our circumstances. In 15 following, Paul moves on to look at our attitude to difficult people. He writes, "It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the divines of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false or true motives, Christ is preached. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice." And here, Paul mentions that some people are preaching out of rivalry and envy. Their motives may be false, but they're proclaiming Jesus, so the result is still a success. And the gospel is advanced. And he also mentioned those who are preaching for good and right motives. Again, another successful result. You see, bad circumstances have turned out to be gospel opportunities. And Paul is absolutely thrilled about that. Friends, when you are wronged by others, do you spend your time going down road after road just to get your own back? Do you hold on to that grudge? Do you ostracise them? Do you isolate them because of something that was said or some action? Or do you praise God that the gospel is being worked out through these situations? Can you see that there's opportunity even in that roadblock? And Paul ends this section with the sound of triumph. No mention of his circumstances, no. Rather, with a shout of praise. Rejoice in the Lord always. Verse 18, the important thing is that in every way, whether from false or true motives, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice. What a wonderful note of triumph. You see, Paul wrote this letter because he wanted the Christians to be so Christ-centered that they would know what it is to live in joy, serving God and rejoicing in God. He found his contentment. He found his peace. He found his joy in Jesus. Christ has strengthened him. Because in these difficult circumstances, Paul has the big picture at hand in his eye. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Holocaust, wrote these words: "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude to any given set of circumstances. We should pursue joy instead of happiness. If you only focus on the playthings of circumstance, that's just happiness, and you'll never be joyful. But when you have a bigger plan that goes beyond even the most harrowing of circumstances, then you can know joy. That's wonderful. Joy comes from within, not from outward circumstances. When Jesus Christ is at the centre, he changes our attitude to all circumstances, no matter what they are. He delivers us from that preoccupation with ourselves and with those who have offended us. When Jesus is at the centre of something, then we have something bigger to live for. It's all about living for him. So how is the gospel being advanced through your current experiences, whatever they may be? How is Christ being revealed through your circumstances at this time? Can I encourage you to use those experiences, to use those circumstances, to use those events for supporting, building up, and like Paul, living out the gospel so that those around may see something of the beauty and the wonder and the freedom and the grace that comes from knowing Jesus. And in doing so, may we all rejoice. And again, I say, rejoice. Amen.